There are times in our lives when we face crossroads, moments when we don't really know where to go, what life has in store for us, or what's yet to come. You are feeling as if you're in a kind of stagnation, a stasis, maybe even paralysis. And of course, these moments and thoughts are different for each person. You can see this often in creative processes. People talk about a writer's block or a creative block. Great artists like Beethoven, Edvard Munch, Dostoevsky, or even Claude Monet went through such a phase. A time when they didn't know what they were doing at all, what made sense, or simply lacked inspiration. They might have been burned out, or even come to detest the entire creative process. Beethoven, for example, began to lose his hearing at age 20 and withdrew from society. In his later will, he wrote about his despair and his thoughts about death. Nevertheless, he continued to compose and even created his famous Ninth Symphony, even though he was already almost completely deaf at that point. With Dostoevsky, it was quite different. His first major publication was in 1846, with his novel Poor Folk. Russian literary critics immediately hailed him as a new literary genius. In 1849, 3 years later, he was sentenced to death due to political persecution. He was already facing the firing squad. However, this was a psychological tactic that was used at the time against prisoners in Russia to break their will. As a result, he spent 4 years in the Siberian Katorga prison camp. Afterwards, he was also forced to serve several years in the army. These existential, extreme experiences enabled him to create psychological and also philosophical masterpieces, such as Crime and Punishment and The Brothers Karamazov. While researching this topic, I also came across another artist who had similar experiences, but overcame his crisis in a different way. I'm speaking of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. And many know Goethe from his works such as Faust, The Sorrows of Young Werther, or poems like The Erl King or even Prometheus. He was born in 1749 in Frankfurt am Main and was a German poet, politician, and naturalist. He is considered one of the most significant figures in German language poetry. He first gained recognition in the national literary world with the drama Goethes von Berlichingen in 1773. The Sorrows of Young Werther, 1 year later, even brought him European acclaim. In 1775, he was summoned by Duke Karl August to the court in Weimar, where he remained for the rest of his life, and held political and administrative offices as a friend and minister to the Duke. 10 years passed. When the publisher Georg Joachim Göschen offered Goethe the opportunity to compile a complete works edition, it suddenly dawned him that he hadn't published anything new in the last 10 years. He had been simply drifting through life. Thus, his self-doubt about his dual existence as an artist and also a civil servant intensified. Goethe reflected on himself and realized, this cannot go on, I must change something. Unlike Beethoven or Dostoevsky, Goethe did not suffer a stroke of fate in the conventional sense. Perhaps it was a realization that the life he had led in recent years was not the one he had envisioned. Yes, perhaps he had even lost his artistic streak and his creative spark during his time at the Duke's court. It took only 10 years, a publisher, and some reflection, and Goethe knew he had to make a change in his life. On September 3rd, 1786, Goethe set out on his Grand Tour. And the term Grand Tour is not something I made up. The Grand Tour, also known as the Cavalier's Journey, obligatory since the Renaissance, through Central Europe, France, Italy, Spain, and even the Holy Land sometimes. However, this type of travel was reserved only for the sons of the European nobility, and later also for the upper middle class. Because, you could imagine, traveling through Europe cost a lot of money at that time. In a broader sense, the educational journey of adult members of these social classes were also referred to by this term, the Grand Tour. Originally, it marked the culmination of a person's education and the journey was intended to familiarize them with the art, culture, and history, and of course, the way of life of the European elite. You could compare it to a gap year or a year abroad after college or high school. Most of these young men were between the ages of 18 and 25 when they embarked on this journey. People like the famous painter Benjamin West, the writer Mary Shelley who wrote Frankenstein, or Lord Byron, one of England's most famous romantic poets, and even Oscar Wilde, all embarked on such a grand tour. A journey of self-discovery, seeking new influences, impressions, cultures, and experiences. In some cases, these journeys lasted for years, and were therefore extremely expensive, like I said. One could even speak of the beginning of luxury tourism, but that's another topic for another video. Back to Goethe's Grand Tour, and why I find his journey in particular so interesting and exciting. Goethe had already planned to embark on such a journey 3 times before, but it never worked out. His work and his obligations at the Weimar court always took precedence. It wasn't until he was 37 that he set out alone at 3 in the night on a stagecoach from Karlsbad, under a fake name, Johann Philipp Müller, without many words or a grand farewell. It was a decision he had to make for himself. The constraints of court life gradually began to weigh on him, and his relationship with Charlotte von Stein was becoming increasingly unsatisfying. And as I mentioned earlier, most people undertook such a journey in their early 20s, but with Goethe it was different. He realized that his life as he was living it now did not satisfy him, and that only he could change it. But to do this, he needed a change of scenery. He had left a letter for Duke Karl August just the day before, in which he vaguely requested an indefinite leave of absence for health and mental reasons. However, he did not write where he was going or how long he would be away. When Karl August read the letter, he wasn't angry. It was a mixture of deep friendship and concern, so he actually approved the leave. Furthermore, he simply allowed Goethe to continue receiving his full salary. And a fun fact, Karl August was a Freemason, and so was Goethe also. They were even elevated to the rank of master at the same time in 1782. And Karl August also joined the Order of the Illuminati. Yes, there was a real Order of the Illuminati, which was founded on May 1st, 1776 by Adam Weishaupt, before it was banned in 1784-1785. In addition, the then King of Prussia, Frederick II, also known as the Potato King, knighted him into the Order of the Black Eagle, which was the highest order of the Prussian crown. Goethe's trip to Italy lasted a total of 2 years, and he also wrote down much of what he experienced and observed. In his Journey to Italy, he writes about his impressions of the landscape and the flow of the rivers as they wind their way down into the valleys, linking his observations to scientific theories or even his own, such as the idea of the primordial plant. From plants and volcanoes to rocks and minerals, and on to colors and geological phenomena of Vesuvius and Sicily. He describes his impressions of Rome, Naples, Sicily, and the ancient sites, and attempts to gain a direct understanding of art, nature, and people's lives. He was particularly influenced by his encounters with artists such as Tischbein, with whom he also lived for a time in Rome. Tischbein was also the one who painted that famous portrait of Goethe. During his visit in Pompeii with Tischbein, he wrote, "And so the current state of utter desolation of a city, first covered by rain of stone and ash, then plundered by those who unearthed it, points to a passion for art and imagery shared by an entire nation, of which even the most ardent enthusiast today has neither a concept, nor a sense, nor a need." Another important social connection there was the artist Angelika Kauffmann. Goethe sketched 700 to 800 drawings during his journey. His private life also found its way into his work. In Rome and later during his stay, he experienced a romantic relationship that helped shape writing his Roman elegies, also known as Erotica Romana. The poems celebrate sensual love, physical pleasure, and the free life of the South. One might call it a kitsch novel. On his journey with the draftsman Christoph Heinrich Kniep, he captured landscapes and impressions. When he was staying in Rome, he wrote, "When one looks upon such a civilization, which is 2000 years old and more, so diverse and fundamentally transformed by the changing times, and yet still the same soil, the same mountain, indeed often the same column and wall, and traces of the ancient character still lingering amongst the people. One becomes a participant in the grand designs of fate. And so, from the very outset, it is difficult for the observer to discern how Rome follows upon Rome, not merely the new upon the old, but the various epochs of the old and the new themselves in succession. And for me, these writings or texts actually show how Goethe was thinking about, his whole trip in a different way, and how he was trying to kind of soak in all of the history and all of the culture and nature was surrounding him, right? Because back in Weimar, I don't know if you ever have been to Weimar. I'm also not sure how it was back then in 1780, but I can imagine that, going from Germany into Rome and seeing all these beautiful things, and especially Italy in general, is a big eye-opener, I would say. In April 1788, he finally began his return journey. Goethe had left Rome on April 23rd, traveled through Siena and Florence, continued on to Bologna, and then stayed in Milan for 10 days. From there, he crossed the Alps back to Germany. And on June 8, 1788, he finally returned to Weimar, after a total of nearly 2 years in Italy. But he was no longer the same man as before. What had once begun as an escape from his previous life had become a profound search for himself, a kind of personal self-discovery. Italy did not suddenly give Goethe new ideas. It changed the way he viewed the world, and it transformed his sense of self. And it was precisely from this new perspective that he completed and wrote some of his most significant works in the decades that followed. Iphigenia in Tauris, Egmont, Torquato Tasso, Roman Elegies, Faust I and II, and Wilhelm's Meister apprenticeship. His journey had not only opened up a foreign world to him, but also helped him see his own world through different eyes. Thus, in retrospective, his trip to Italy is far more than just a record. It is proof of Goethe's own transformation, that through his encounter with the foreign, he found a part of himself. And just as Goethe's trip to Italy was transformative for him, so was this video actually for me, because it's a different kind of topic I never did before. Slightly, but it's not typical for the channel. And also, I used a different approach to, in general, just write the script and everything. But I hope you enjoyed this video and maybe also learned something new. About what other topic should I make a video about? Let me know in the comments. And as always, this is HistoryCrafts, where history crafts itself.